Hello everyone, my name is Jacob Stein, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Sortition, a case against majoritarianism, advised by Professor Andrew Wood. So, my project is centered on this question: what is the most equitable way for a group with internal differences to produce a single decision? Now, this is something that we encounter all the time, right? We see this in politics, you might see this in school or the workplace, you might even see it in your social circles where you're deciding which Airbnb to stay at or what food to get, right? So because we see this all the time, we as humans have come up with many mechanisms to produce one such decision, right? And some of you might be familiar with majoritarianism, right? We just consider all the decisions that we could make, we vote on them, and then we select the one with the most votes with the logic that you want to satisfy the most people in the group as possible, right? Mine is about a different such mechanism called sortition, which attempts to solve this problem using random sampling. So, before I even get into what it is, I want you to think of a decision-making mechanism as a reshaping of influence, right? Usually some group has some distribution of preferences or ideologies, right? But as they produce decisions, those decisions are often not perfectly reflective of those preferences, right? They might skew in favor of a majority or some other subset of the group. To concretize this, consider an example with 3 people who are in a group, and there's one faction that has 2 people, and the other faction has 1 person. If we ask them to make 1,000 decisions and vote by majority every time, you can see that the decisions will just skew in favor of the majority faction, right? The idea under sortition is that you just sample 1 person from the group at every decision, and you ask them to unilaterally decide on behalf of the group. Over time, as they continue to make decisions, the distribution of empirical decisions should begin to match the actual distribution of ideologies within the group. So this is the core tenet of sortition. So, from a political theoretical perspective, what does this mean? The first benefit, of course, is that proportionality, right? That decisions actually reflect preferences. The second is this idea called forbearance, which is just a fancy word for political moderation, right? Normally, when a majority gains power, they can continue to enact their agenda until a minority gets a chance to respond. This leads to extreme decisions that often lead to instability. Under sortition, the person going after you might be that minority that you just passed a bad decision against, right? So there is now a probabilistic chance of retaliation, and because that exists, you now have to moderate your behavior for fear of response. The third benefit is the impact on lobbying. If a lobbyist doesn't know who's actually going to be making the decision, they don't know who to channel those resources to, and it just might so happen that they might get a decision maker unsympathetic to their cause no matter how much resources they channel in their direction. So lobbying becomes a much harder problem. For some of the cons, there is a bit of a legitimacy crisis under sortition. In a normal electoral system, the person who's in power usually derives their authority from the fact that they were elected, right? But under sortition, you're just randomly picked, right? You have no mandate beyond the fact that you just happened to be the next person to make the decision. There's also, of course, competence. I don't know if I would trust any random American citizen or otherwise to make decisions like a big legislature would. And then, of course, feasibility, right? You need a ton of institutions to set the agenda, to actually pick the randomness, right, and to enforce the decisions that they make. So, I wanted to analyze how someone might behave optimally under these circumstances. Like, if we were in a sortition system, what should you do? Before I could even answer that question, I needed to jump from the qualitative aspects of sortition to more of a quantitative representation, right? I needed to be able to quantify political ideologies and political decisions. And in order to do this, I drew on something that many of you might be familiar with, the good old political compass. So for those of you who haven't seen this basically just maps ideologies into a 2D grid or a vector space, right? And so we now have a way of saying these beliefs can be summarized with a vector like that, right? We can just say, you know, if you're a left libertarian, then we would represent you as -3, -2, right? Now, if we want to know how you feel about a decision that is right in libertarian, we can just measure the distance between you guys, right? And to do this, we pull out our good old distance formula from high school, right? We plug in those numbers, and there's your distance, right? But logically, the decisions that are closer to you, closer to your ideology, should be weighted higher, right? So instead, we take 1 and we divide it by that, so that stuff that's closer to you will be rated higher, and stuff that's further from you will be rated lower. This now enables us to create a concept of rewards over political ideologies. So we can now say that a person who is represented by the red dot has preferences for stuff close to them. So this is just a graph of that function right up there, right? It's a sticky political ideology graph. From here, what I did is, like any optimization problem, I just threw an artificial intelligence model at it. And so I took the 9 Supreme Court justices and I mapped them into a vector space like this. I took past Supreme Court decisions and also mapped it into a vector space. And then I asked 9 artificial intelligence models to behave like Supreme Court justices under this model and see if they would make the decisions that the actual justice made throughout history, right? Supreme Court is the highest decision-making body in our country, so I would love to see how sortition would work there. The training process for them went like this. I told a model, this is your ideology, and I said, what decision would you make? They push out a decision, and then I need a way to tell them how good or bad they were. So I drew on a horrible math formula that looks really bad, but bear with me, I'll break it down, called the Bellman equation. And what this basically says is that you should have made the decision that maximizes both your current rewards in the moment, as well as a discounted consideration of how people are going to respond to you. And what we basically do is we use this to tell the neural network how good or bad it was doing, and we just do this a million times until it gets smarter. So once I had trained up these 9 AI justices, I asked them to play against each other. How would you behave if you were in the Supreme Court and you were randomly selected to unilaterally decide on historical cases? And so these are graphs of their performance. The left graph is your learning curve. This basically says, over time, as you played against each other, how well did you do? We can see that some models started to get really smart. They were making very advantageous decisions. But around cycle 3000, there was a big crash off, right? The losers were able to adjust their strategy to fight against the people who had been accumulating more of a reward. The right graph is your standard deviation in performance. So if the standard deviation is higher, it means that the performance is more spread out. So there are some models who are doing really well and some who are doing very poorly. If it goes back down, it means that they're all doing about the same. And as you can see, when the loser models adjusted their strategy around the 3000 cycle, the standard deviation crashed. So this indicates that if you adjust your strategy, you can pull down people who are gaining an advantage back to your level and then continue from there. The most interesting finding from these models are these 2 graphs. I tried 2 different training techniques, and these are graphs of the 9 justices' max, minimum, and average marginal gain against each other. You can see that if any model was able to maximize some reward, their reward was offset by a parallel minimized reward as well, and all of their averages are 0. This suggests that over time, the average marginal gain that any justice was able to achieve with 2 different training techniques was 0, which maybe indicates that empirically, sortition could be a more fair mechanism than some of the ones we use today. But that is unfortunately a very hard thing to prove constructively, so maybe we'll save that for grad school or another time. Thank you very much.
Any?
Thanks, Jacob. Very interesting work. That 3,000 cycles, is that consistent? Like if you change your neural net, would you see that shifting, or is there something significant about why it kind of crashes at that point?
So I tried it with a different training technique, and the same thing didn't occur. It actually happened at a different cycle length. But what basically occurred is that enough extreme decisions had been made by the winners so that the losing justices shifted their ideologies to also become a little more extreme. And then since they made more extreme decisions, they started to gain more at the expense of the people who had previously been doing well. But that was more a result of the training techniques, and I don't know if it would occur.
It'll shift based on your methods.
Exactly.
Interesting, but it always happens.
It did happen when we ran it multiple times with that method.
Any other questions?
Is this how you want the Supreme Court to run, Jacob?
That is a loaded question. I'm going to plead the fifth on that one. Who knows?
Anyone else?
Okay. Oh, Soph.
When you were doing the political compass for all of the Supreme Court justices, like how did you come to the decisions of where they would be graphed on? Like, I know you said you used court cases, but like, what did that actually look like?
So there's a ton of basically political science papers that basically track the ideological drift of Supreme Court justices over time. One of the struggles was with the current court. There are a lot of new justices, so they haven't made a ton of decisions. So I kind of had to like factor in my own like probably modeling bias that like certain justices probably belong more on the right or on the left. But what we tried to do is just draw on studies that placed them in one place or another.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.